So this is a work we have been doing together. This is not just this is me and Ondřej and Bára. This is a part of a project that we have funded by the grant agency, exploring exactly this. And I want to talk about the very sort of idea that, the very sort of simple question, is there a rural-urban divide in the Czech Republic? Does it exist? And if, how does it exist also? So the question is very simple. The answer, not so much, of course. So I want to start with a picture of I want to start with a picture of Yeti, of Bigfoot. You know, so there are people who think that Yeti exists, and there are people who think that Yeti doesn't exist, right? And the people who think that Yeti doesn't exist typically argue that they have not seen him yet, that he hasn't been seen. So the reason for existence is considered to be whether you can see something, whether you can encounter it actually, right? But even the people who don't believe in Yeti, who think that he doesn't exist, are probably ready to change their views if they saw him. And if you saw a Yeti, even if you don't believe in the existence of Yeti, you would know that it's a Yeti. So you have a scheme, you have an interpretive category in your mind that tells you, yes, this is probably a Yeti, this is probably and I think this is good to keep in mind when we talk about the rural-urban divide, whether it really exists or it doesn't exist, because it's precisely the sort of problems that we will encounter in that. Because people have seen the rural-urban divide. It's a thing that people see, right? Every time there's an election, this is the American presidential election, the last one, and you can clearly see that the link between population density on the left-hand map and the election results on the right-hand map, which is, of course, Trump being the red areas going for Trump, the blue ones voting for Biden. And you can clearly see where the urban areas are, you can clearly see where the rural areas are. Poland, a beautiful map, again, the last presidential election in Poland, and you can see, you don't have to look at the map of big cities to know where big cities are in Poland, because you can see it in the election results map. And of course, you can see it in the Czech Republic as well. Not so clearly, maybe, but you can see where the big cities are. And this, again, this is the last presidential elections. We, of course, are very much looking forward to having new data coming in very soon. But this is the last one. This is Zeman against Drahoš. And again, Drahoš winning in the big cities, and around them, Zeman in the sort of rural areas. This notion, this concept, the rural-urban divide, became prominent in the public discourse in political science, social sciences, after 2016, as a sort of reaction to the Brexit referendum and to the election of Donald Trump, of course, for American president. People started publishing things like this, right? The power has leaked from cities to the countryside, a very sort of influential commentary. When we talk about the rural-urban divide, we typically talk about the divide in values, or in attitudes, or in voting behavior, right? Not a divide in terms of how rich or poor the people are, right? Not in terms of deprivation or inequality, which is a factor, but it's not the divide that people talk about, right? The divide is always on the level of culture, of values, of what people believe in, how people vote, and so on. There are, within the vast literature on the topic, there are two sort of general approaches, one of which would say the divide can be explained by demographic difference. So it's people who move to the cities are people like you and me, who have a university job, so we have to work in cities, and that's what makes cities educated, and that's what makes them vote in a certain way, right? And of course, and similar effects of age, of course. And then there's another approach which says, well, it's not really the demographics, it's the place itself. If people perceive the place where they live as declining, they will vote protest parties, and maybe if you live in a city, it will make you more cosmopolitan, because the place has an effect itself, right? There is, of course, a very established debate on center and periphery in not only, of course, in sociology with Schillers and so on, but with in cultural geography, where people talk about the sort of uprising at the periphery, and periphery kind of being alienated from what is happening at the center. So people at the periphery think that what people in the centers, in the urban centers, are doing doesn't matter, and it's It's empty words, and the politicians from the elites and the sort of protesting. One of the symbols of this, of course, you will probably remember the yellow vests in France, which was not actually a rural protest. It's actually, so the data that we have now show us that the centers of the yellow vests were not villages, but they were small cities, so small centers, so to speak, right? And of course, there is this interplay between the social borders, so the border between the city and the village, and the sort of symbolic borders, so how they imagine each other, on how we imagine people from cities and people from rural areas in the sort of public discourses. And there are differences in voting behavior, like I told you. There are differences between rural areas and urban areas in terms of voting behavior. This is sort of recent analysis that has been done on European countries and on the performance of anti-EU parties, right? And you can see that in most cases, the blue squares are the cities. In most cases, the anti-EU parties were doing worse, where the performance was worse in cities, right? In most cases, you can see that the blue square is at the bottom of the thing. But there is a line, actually, there's a line, and there's a recent study on that, the Kenny and Lucas study, which says that there is quite a difference between the old European Union and the new sort of after 2004 European Union. That in the old EU, the rural-urban border, the polarization is much more visible than in the newly joined countries, including the Czech Republic, of course. There are quite a few influential books on that. I will just name two of them. This is The Politics of Resentment by Catherine Kramer, which came out in 2016, and it talks about this specific case of a Wisconsin senator. And what she did, Kramer, was she was visiting basically clubs and sort of social events in rural areas, talking to the people and talking about their views on cities. And she found what she calls a sense of resentment, a sense of being left behind, sort of being treated unfairly and always getting the short end of the stick, while the people see themselves as hardworking, as actually doing hard and meaningful work, as opposed to the people in cities who are viewed as doing some sort of abstract, easy work. And there's a beautiful metaphor that one of the respondents was using when he was talking to Kramer, and he told her there are people who take a shower before they go to work, and there are people who take a shower after they come back from work, and there's a difference between those people, right? That's I think it's a great sort of metaphor how to make this Darren's example. And there's another book that you might be also familiar with by Ali Hochschild on the strangers in their own land, which is, again, is not explicitly on the urban-rural divide, but it kind of goes to explain why is it that people in Louisiana, where of course chemical industry is storing waste underground and creating huge pollution, and still the local residents, the old-time rural residents, are against regulation of the industry, are voting for deregulation and so on. And she goes on to explain this, that they have no trust in the state because they feel like the state has never done anything good for them. And actually, that there is a favoritism in politics where there's this, you're probably familiar with this kind of deep story about the queue for American dream. And what these people are seeing is that every other group has some of its representatives in Washington kind of helping them. The minorities have their organization, the immigrants, the LGBT people, everybody has somebody who is kind of helping them out in Washington, but nobody's helping us. And we are the ones who are at the back of the queue, and there are people constantly sort of overtaking. So this sort of way of imagining the divide and the estrangement from the institutions. So what we are doing, I'm not saying what we did because we are still doing this, and we will be doing this for quite a while. We're looking at how this specific rural-urban divide whether it exists in the Czech Republic and how it exists. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some of the results of the quantitative. I won't show you much really. What we did was we took all the surveys that we could, all the recent surveys that we could, including the ESS, the EVS, the ISSP, and so on, and we were looking very simply, are there differences in values and attitudes between the rural and urban populations? No, there aren't. No, there aren't. Okay, there are very minor differences, and if there is a statistically significant difference, then it's usually very weak in terms of the actual index. This is one example. I'll just show you examples because really, we have done quite a few of those, and this is from rozdíl a společnost from 2019, and this is so in both of these pictures you have municipalities with more than 5,000 inhabitants and municipalities with less than 5,000 inhabitants. And the picture on the left shows you trust in institutions. The picture on the right shows you levels of agreement with various kind of statements about democracy. And yeah, I won't bother you because, of course, what you can see that there is no difference. That's the point. But we didn't give up, of course. We're not the kind of people who give up. So we looked at the voting behavior because apparently there is a difference in voting behavior. The thing is, there is a difference in voting behavior in the presidential elections until you start controlling for education. Once you start controlling for education, the difference again disappears. It's the education which makes the difference between Zeman and Drahoš. Look, urban-rural. It's not the urban-rural factor itself. It's education. But maybe there is a difference in terms of, we have a database that shows us the commuting times from villages to centers, to okresní město, central district, I don't know what it's called. So for every village in the Czech Republic, we have a commuting time that has been calculated because of commuting distance doesn't give you good pictures. We have commuting times. And we thought, well, okay, there are different kinds of rural areas. There are rural areas around Brno, around Prague, the sort of suburban peripheries, and they will probably vote differently than people who are in the remote, the sort of light gray rural areas. So maybe there will be a difference, right? So hopefully we went to look for a difference. So we were basically correlating the election results of protest parties, which was for our analysis SPD, Volný blok, KSČM, Přísaha, and Trikolora in the last elections. And we were examining the relationship between their election performance and the commuting time to the center. And it's not there. Actually, the result was weakly negative. So quite contrary to what we expected. But we didn't give up. And we, fortunately, I mean, we have Láďa Rabušič was so kind that they gave us the data from the European Value Study, the last one, and we were able to look at the values from the EVS survey and relate them to the commuting times. So we have divided, or it wasn't me who did the analysis. I wouldn't be able to do this. We have divided the municipalities into the rural municipalities into 4 quartiles in terms of how close or far they are from cities, right? So we have the Q1, which is the sort of suburban rural areas, the Q4, which are like very, very remote. And we were looking for differences in values, not in politics, not in elections, but in values. And again, I will not show you the whole results, just basically the general story is, no, there is not a difference again. There is, again, not a difference. The kind of significant correlations that we found were not really systematic in terms of giving us a sort of picture of a rural-urban difference, not even for remote rural areas in terms of values. There were some like very weak kind of correlations in terms of conservatism and so on, but not really much. But then, think about the Yeti, right? Think about the Thomas theory. The rural-urban divide doesn't have to be real itself, like that we can measure it. But if people define something as real, then it may be real in consequences. Maybe the rural-urban divide is real on a different, in a different way. Okay? And here's an interesting set of data, right? This is a book from Ondřej Babiš, the former prime minister, which was massively spread before the last elections. It's called, sdílejte, než to zakážou, so share it before they ban it. I don't know, have they already or not? And there's a chapter, so one of those chapters where he's kind of presenting himself is called Jsem venkovan, which is I am a rural person. And in the chapter, he's talking so much about the sort of relationship that he has to food and how he knows where food comes from, how he understands agriculture, right? And it's full of kind of so at the I can show you with the mouse like this, right? Sometimes I have a feeling that I'm being too harsh and that today the young people don't really see this, meaning the agriculture, meaning where food comes from, right? All they want to hear is that the thing that they have ordered in a sort of glass cafe in the city center is bio and it comes from free range something husbandry. Other than that, they don't care. They, the people in cities, don't care about where the food comes from, while we, the rural people, we do. And even though you can't really measure the divide like we tried to, it is obvious that he's referring to something, like with the Yeti. When you see the Yeti, you know it's a Yeti, right? Because you have this scheme. And this is the case, right? He's talking to something that people will understand, that people will make sense of, right? And it's very likely, given the way that the campaign of Anna works, that he has had this tested fairly well with focus groups and whatnot. And if you look at the public discourse on the rural urban areas from this perspective, you will find that it's prominently pronounced throughout the media discourse. We have looked at I don't know, the last 10 years, I think we were studying, right? And if you look at the kind of, these are just some examples or examples, right, of how people refer to the rural-urban divide. And it's a pertinent topic. It's coming back all the time. People talk about this all the time, even though statistically it's not really there, but still it's something that people perceive and they believe it's real, right, to the point where it becomes real in its consequences. Right, this is, I will just give you the sort of quotation, one of the many quotations. In cities, people are used to comfort. Buses go every 10 minutes, it's warm at home, you have hot water, and in the village, you must do it yourself. Take the traffic. The closest bus departs from the next village, and only twice a day. If you want to get somewhere, you need a driving license. And the same goes for other things. If you want warmth, you have to learn to do the fire in the stove. Are you hungry? Start growing vegetables, right? That's something that you have to deserve. The life is not given to you. You must deserve it. And the articles which discuss the kind of relationship are full of this. We have been able, basically, looking at the kind of binary distinctions that separate, that are sort of, that the rural-urban divide is sort of mapped onto, right, the structures. One was the distinction of sort of strength and weakness, the cities as the sort of strong, the centers, and the kind of weak, endangered rural areas. The other one was hard work in rural areas against kind of slacking, kind of lazy life in rural areas. But there was a very strong sort of underlying representation of the real against the unreal. That there is a real life which you can experience if you go into village, if you live in a village. It's a real life, while what people in cities live is a sort of unreal experience. Again, you're probably familiar with the trope of the Prague cafe and the Pražská kavárna. So it's a real or unreal life that people basically refer to when they refer to the rural-urban divide. I think I will have to conclude very quickly. So this is the last slide, I think. So what we found out when we're looking for the rural-urban divide, we found out that there is a very weak social border. So the border, objective border, right? The social border is very weak, but the symbolic border is strong. Symbolic border, how it's perceived, how it's articulated, is strong. And what we want to find out now, so one of the things we are very interested in is, so why is it that the rural-urban divide has become such a comfortable vehicle for expressing the kind of feelings of alienation and the kind of protest and so on? Why of all the kind of young against old or whatever you might have, the rural-urban divide has become such a comfortable vehicle for this kind of protest? And one of the reasons that we think this might, be the case is that there's a word missing there. Our ideas, our images of the rural are ideologic in terms that they, Raymond Williams writes in The Country and the City, right? That we have very good use for rural anti-idyll. So whenever Donald Trump or somebody like him wins an election, we always have the kind of rural idiots to blame. The kind of, look at them, they are uneducated, they don't understand, they don't have the resources, they don't have, and so on, right? So we can very easily use the rural areas for that, but we can also very easily use the rural areas to kind of spread the idyll. When you have films like in Czech Republic, you have Cesta v města and the kind of films, but you have loads of those where there's this confused person from the city arrives to rural areas and sees things for the first time, how food is done, how real lives really look like, and in the end, the person from the city will accept that this is the true real life, and this is where, and it's a very comforting thought, right? That there is a real life out there, and all you have to do is switch off your phone and go take the first train and go somewhere, and there the real life is waiting for you. It's not, of course. Nobody working in urban political economy, everybody will tell you, the urban capitalism is everywhere. It's in every capillary of the society, in every little village. There is urban capitalism, like everywhere. But we have this kind of ideology, we have this kind of idiot which tells us, just, put away your phone and you can live the sort of idyllic life. So maybe that's why the rural areas, the urban-rural divide is such a strong symbolic border and so attractive for us, because it performs this kind of ideological functions, maybe. Thank you very much.